Hey friends, it's Laura with Laura B. FlossTube. Welcome or welcome back. I'm so glad you joined me today. I am going to be continuing our series on vintage linens. We're upcycling, recycling, repurposing, giving them new life. I received such great feedback from both sides of the aisle, from our viewers that have said that they are completely supportive of this effort, and others that are thinking that I am losing my mind for destroying these vintage items. Now, I do want to point out the family that passed along these items wanted them to go to a charity. They wanted them to be used. They wanted them to be cut apart and put into something new and given to the charity that we are supporting. So I want to keep that in mind, and I definitely want to give credit where credit is due with the items. I don't want to discount the amount of work or art that went into making these items, but I also want to make sure that I'm honoring the legacy and the intent of the family. So with all of that in mind, today we are going to be working with our pillowcases. So I have my pillowcases rounded up. I have some cute fabric that we're going to be using to get them together, and we're going to move on to the cutting mat and start talking about how to cut them up and put them into this design right here. This is our pillowcase quilt top. On the cutting mat is pillowcase number 1. Now this is the one that has the stains and the yellowing, and unfortunately I was not able to get the stains out of it. But I have a plan. We're going to go ahead and cut it, and then we're going to talk about how we're going to fix it so we don't have to worry about those stains on the back side of this pillowcase. So I've kind of laid it out here, and they're not like perfectly pressed. I'm just going to say that. But I do have them lined out. I have it lined up on my cutting mat, and I've determined that I'm going to cut this at 8 inches wide, which will make sure that I have basically 7.5 inch strip on my quilt. There's pillowcase number 1. We have 3 more to go. And obviously that's not the only cut that I have to do, but it's the first one. The first cut's always the hardest, right? We're going to get through this together, though. Now, this one is so pretty. And I am doing these one at a time just because I want to make sure that none of the embroidery and none of the crocheted trim is affected. And I did have someone comment and say that they thought the trim was tatted, but I have to respectfully disagree. My grandma and my mom both crocheted and tatted, actually. And looking at the stitching on this, I mean, it's been through the wash a few times, but that's definitely a crochet stitch that's on the edge of this pillowcase. And you can tell even more with this one. Let me get this closer. You can tell even more with this one that this is definitely a crocheted edge. And I do have a trick for that when we get to the point where we need to cut the backs of these pillowcases. Now this one is a different set, different design. Now remember, our strips do not need to be the same width. It's fine if they're different. And in fact, if I look at this at 6 inches, I'm pretty well above the design. I am going to go ahead and cut this at 7, thinking about the overall length of my quilt. Now, I do have a lot of pillowcases in the closet. If I needed to go grab one more, I could do it. Grandma would not be mad. It would be okay. Neither would Mom. Mom would think it was cool that we're making quilts for charity. My whole family kind of has a heart for helping kids in need, especially just people in need, but especially kids. All right, so here we have all 4 of the pillowcases cut. Now, I'm not discarding this leftover pillowcase fabric. Don't worry about that. The one that's stained, it's going to be discarded. All right, now we have some decisions to make. Because obviously, there are many ways we could cut these. We could cut them with the design in the middle. We could cut them with the designs offset. Or we could cut them randomly. So let's see if we take this, let's see what this would look like. Because we don't want to make any cuts in the back of this pillowcase before we decide how we want to do it. Now, remember that there is going to be fabric between these. And this one would be in the middle. This one could be over on the other side. And that's kind of cute, actually, like that. And then this one in the middle again. I kind of like that. I don't think I'd want it that close to the edge, but fairly. Yeah, and I think that that would give me a lot of nice white space here that I could continue this design out with my quilting. I could go ahead and do more vines and do some quilting to accent and complement this embroidery stitching. So I'm going to move this over just a bit. Now these I'm going to cut in the center. The other two I'm going to cut offset. And I think I'm going to use my ruler here and just measure. Let's say we're going to get 3 inches maybe. Yeah, a little 2.5 maybe. We can move this over just a little, a smidge. That's basically 3 inches from the design. And I'm actually just going to cut it with my rotary cutter. Now, remember I told you this is a crocheted trim. When you cut crochet, it will unravel, and that is not what we want. So I'm going to grab the fray check, and I'm going to go to the end of this crochet. Now remember, this is going to be on my seam, so it doesn't matter. It'll be all right. I'm going to pinch that a little bit, especially this one. Oof. And now that fray check will basically glue my fibers together of that crocheted trim and hold them in place for me. Now I am going to go ahead and sew this up today, but just in case something happened that was tugged a little bit, I don't have to worry about that coming undone, unraveling. Okay, same with this one. I'm going to do this one kind of leaning towards me though, so I can use my ruler effectively. Same thing here. Line it up at the top edge. That is 3 inches. And again, getting my fray check to secure those little threads. I'll set this off to the side. Now these, I need to figure out where the center is. So on this, I am going to kind of feel my embroidery. I actually think these pillowcases are a little smaller too. Give that little crease. This is definitely an overkill for my ruler. I could have used a much smaller ruler, but hey, it was laying here, so that's how it works sometimes, right? All right. Fray check these. How you guys doing out there? Are you freaking out on me cutting all these vintage pillowcases? I promise you it's going to be a cute quilt. It's going to get used. It's going to be loved. And at the end of the day, isn't that what all of us want for our items? I do believe that's what I want, at least. All right, so now the next thing we want to do, I'm just going to fold these in half, actually. I want to make sure these guys are the same, and I don't think they are. I think these pillowcases here are they were a little wider, I think. Yes. All right, so let's see here. This is right at 17.5 inches. So we need to cut these down to 17.5. Now remember, we offset those, so we don't want to lose our offset. So we are going to line these up like so. And yeah, I know, we're gonna have to redo the fray check a little bit. That's okay. Just on the one side. I'm not picking that up until I do. Until I have the fray check in hand. All right, so all of my edges are fray checked. So this 3 of the 4 are ready to start working with our background fabric, but one of them is not, and that is the one that has some staining in it. Now, when I look at this strip, there's a little spot here, but I'm not going to worry about that. I am, however, going to be a little concerned about this right here. So what I'm going to do, since I have all this pillowcase fabric here, is I'm actually going to cut out this section and sew in another piece of the pillowcase fabric. And, you know, you probably will be able to tell a little bit, but not enough that it's going to matter. And it's going to match, so it'll be great. In fact, we're going to go ahead and find the same pillowcase because we know that it had some other staining on it as well. We're going to check it first to see if there's anything on it that we could use, and there really isn't. So we're going to go to the other one. It's from the same set. There we go. Oh yeah, we can definitely use some of this fabric. So let's see how much we're cutting out. We are cutting out, and I want to preserve this trim, but I want to get below that stain, but yet keep in mind that I need to make sure I have 1/4 of an inch here so I can sew into. So it looks like we're going to be cutting out about 6-7 inches. Yeah. About a 6.5 by 7 inch section. So we'll cut this, and then we'll cut this. Yes, this is going to have to require a little finagling to get this sewn in, but we can do it. Now, we're going to use this as our pattern. Lay it down. Because this is the size we cut out, but it needs to be 1/2 inch bigger, 1/4 of an inch all the way around, bigger for our seam allowance. So we can do 1/2 inch on 2 sides and have it done. Now this edge I'll line up even because I allowed for my seam allowance on the other side. pull this up now. Get it out of the way. And then we'll allow for both seam allowances on the top. So we have a 1/2 inch extra up here. And now we will sew this nice piece of pillowcase into the section we cut out, and then start sewing our strips together for our pillowcase quilt. All right, so we've cut our pillowcases, and I've put in that patch on the one pillowcase that had some staining. I've also pressed them so they have a little starch in them, give them a little more stability when I'm anchoring them to that backing fabric. So the next thing I need to do is cut my backing fabric. Now, when we cut our pillowcases, we cut 2 at 8 inches and 2 at 7 inches. And I want to make sure that I'm allowing enough space between those that you can really see my background fabric as well. So I'm going to cut 2 at 12 and 2 at 11. And that's going to give me a nice break between those pillowcases and let some of that yellow background fabric shine through. So let's cut those strips, and then we'll head to the sewing machine to put it together. Actually, I'm going to cut 2 at 11 and 2 at 10 because that's the amount of fabric I have. That's all right. That little bit of a difference is not going to matter, and it's still going to give us a really good finished look. And a nice quilt size. All right, the other thing that we want to do is make sure that we're cutting these the same width as our pillowcases. That way we can just anchor them on. Now, I'm using all the same backing fabric that I'm anchoring my pillowcases to. You could definitely change the fabrics and give it more of a striped effect, but this is just what I want to go with. Now, when we cut the pillowcases, we cut those at 17.5 inches. So I have the fold on the edge over here, and I'll cut this at 17.5. Move these back over here. So we are going to have a little bit of a scrap left over from our strips. I get asked several times in comments and stuff what kind of rotary cutter I'm using. I am using a Quilter Select rotary cutter. I really like it. It's heavier than most of the other rotary cutters I've seen on the market. So it gives a little more weight. And so, I don't know, I feel like it makes it easier to cut your fabric with that extra added weight. But it does have quite a loud clunk when you accidentally drop it. All right, let's head on over to the sewing machine and start assembling our rows. Okay, so our strips are 10 and 11 inches, not 11 and 12 because we didn't have enough fabric for that. So the narrower strips are going to go on the narrower background fabric, and the wider pillowcases will go on the wider background. So I've grabbed my narrower pillowcase and my narrower strip, and all I'm going to do is kind of pin along this top edge just a little bit all the way along the length, and then sew it on with the machine. Now I am going to, like I said, I am going to sew the entire pillowcase piece onto that fabric. So if you look up through the light a little bit, you can see that pretty yellow fabric kind of coming through. And the reason I want to do that is because pillowcase fabric is kind of thin. So giving it that little extra layer will help support the front of my quilt top. Now I am not sponsored by Quilter Select, but I tell you what, I love their products so much. Like I said, I did use a little bit of a bust press, and I starched the pillowcase a little bit so it has a little bit of a added stability to it, which is going to help me when I'm sewing. And I'm just going to pin along here, just in several places along here, just to make sure when I start sewing that nothing's creeping out, off or out of the way. I want to make sure those edges are nice and secure, lined up. Everybody's happy. And the first thing I'm going to do is just run a stitch along this top edge, about a little less than 1/4 of an inch, because I want to just secure this on here. And I'm going to actually lengthen my stitch too, because it's just more of a basting stitch than anything. I am going a little less than a quarter because when I put the rows together, I'll be sewing 1/4 of an inch. This is just to hold it in place. Now, very carefully, what I'm going to do is run another stitch right along this edge here of this crocheted trim, but I need to grab some white thread because my main spool is gray. You'll notice I'm keeping my hands kind of spreading apart, making sure that fabric is not crawling up the background fabric. We don't want it to crawl up there and bunch up. That wouldn't go well for when we're quilting. Alright, so now that's sewn down and secure. And we'll do the other 3 strips and then we'll sew them together. I have my pillowcases sewn to the backing, or the foundation fabric, or whatever you want to call that. The yellow fabric, that's what it's sewn to. And I sewed it along the top edge, just a basting stitch, not even, probably 1/8 of an inch from that edge. And then I also ran 1/4 inch edge along the top of this crocheted trim at the bottom of each of these. So they're nice and secured onto this yellow fabric. So now the next thing I need to do is sew the rows together, and then I had enough of the yellow that I sewed all those little end pieces I cut off. I sewed all of those together into a long strip and cut it at 4 inches. I'll put one of those up at the top, and then I'm going to cut the other piece that's still together. I'm going to cut it into a 2 inch and run it down the side to kind of finish it off, right? So hopefully, and we'll do some measuring when we get the rows together, I believe this should be enough. If you've watched me before, you know that I just don't pin very often. Now these long strips of fabric, you should feel free to pin them if you want to. I'm not going to. I'm going to kind of take a chance, I guess, because I know that I cut them all the same. So I'm just going to go right along there and do my 1/4 inch seam and be a happy camper. Let's go measure it and make some decisions about those side and top borders. I'm going to fold the quilt in half lengthways, and I'm going to measure it at 3 points just to see what my length is, yeah. So I have it right at 40 1/4, nope, right at 40. Here, let's see if we can grab that. It's right at 40 and a quarter, so 40 or 40 and a half there, which doesn't really surprise me. Sometimes, you know, sometimes that just happens. And it's right at 40 there. So we're going to go with 40. So our top border is another 4 inches. So that would actually be 3.5. So we'd have 43.5. Let's see where this falls. If this is 43.5, then we'll cut it and put them on last. This border, what's left, is actually right at 45. So we have plenty to put our top border on first and then our side borders, which is really great because our bottom border is already on there. So it'll just make it look like it was a little more planned to have the top and the bottom borders and then the side borders covering all of it. So we're going to cut this into 2 inches so we can sew those on after we sew the top border on. Just going to make sure that's lined up really good all the way along there so we don't have any waves in our border. And then cut this up too. Now the other thing we will do is we're going to put this top border on and then we will measure it one more time before we cut these side borders to the length they should be. This is going to be so cute. I'm so excited about this. Now I just need to find a cute little pink fabric for the binding, and this project will be super, super adorable. Alright, so I remeasured my quilt top length and it is right at 43 3/4 long. So I cut my side borders. I had just enough because you might remember I had like 44.5. So I really did kind of cut it close, but it worked out. I don't think I could have planned that better. Now I am going to back stitch that outer border just because that way when I take it to the long arm, I don't have to worry about that outside seam pulling loose. And no, I'm not pinning along here. I probably should, honestly, but I'm not. All those little crocheted edges are going to be caught in this outer border seam, so I don't have to worry about them fraying on me anymore. Just kind of, you probably saw me there, I'm just kind of making sure all my seams are going the right way as I move down the edge of the quilt. When I get to this yellow section, I want that pressing up, so I'm just kind of flipping that little edge up so it will lay the right way. Not so bad on this side, but the other side I'm going to have to also make sure that all my little crochet trims don't get caught and flipped up going the wrong way. And I've mentioned in other videos I have a Juki DX7, and honestly that's one of the reasons why I'm not as concerned about pinning, because it has a box feed system, so it moves around in a square rather than just back and forth or in a circle. So it really does make my fabric feed through the machine really evenly and nice. All right, so there's one border. I'll flip this around and we'll get the other side on, and then we will have a quilt top reveal. Oh wait, I gotta press first, and then we'll have a quilt top reveal. Details, details. All right, now remember this side, since those little edges are still a little loose, I'm going to have to make sure they don't get flipped up on me. Just go slow through there. It'll be fine, it'll be fine. again, making sure the seams between my rows of pillowcases, that yellow is pressed up. Okay, I'm going to give this a good press and then we'll throw it up on the design wall so you can have a look. All right, so what do you think? We took 4 vintage pillowcases, we cut them apart, measured them out, added them to a foundation fabric, sewn that together, sewed our rows together, put on a top border, side borders, and we're calling it done. The finished size of this quilt top is 38 by 48, which is perfect size for a kiddo. We support the Easter baskets with the Mexico, Missouri Angel Wings clothing closet. So that's what the family said that they would like these items to go towards. So that's what we're coming up with, projects for that. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your support. If you liked what you saw today, be sure to like the video, leave me a comment below, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and share the channel and videos out. That's the best way you can support the effort. Until we meet again, I hope you find some time to carve out, to craft, and create. Find some joy in whatever you do, and of course, happy stitching.